lovely to be here with Simon Pont from Brave Bison. Just to have a little chat about what's going on this week. Have you had a good week so far?
So far, so good. I can't complain. Thanks a lot.
So obviously, have you seen about Google have opened a YouTube studio in London, or a new one, which is all singing, all dancing, amazing production facility. I just kind of wanted to find out what your thoughts are on this kind of way of investing in the content that they've gone about, and do you think it's a necessary thing to support the influencers in that way?
Well, I think it's certainly support. I think it's the right kind of statement of intent. I think it's a strong gesture, and it's nice to provide that kind of infrastructure and facility and provision for influencers. I suppose one of the questions you can ask is, do some of those social creators, those influencers, actually need that facility? If so much social content is done, almost on the fly, in a sort of almost a more deliberately lo-fi, low-tech way, so that it becomes almost generally more kind of human and more real, and sincere, because it is a very sincere piece of video comment from the creator. Then do they need to be in a studio like this? And there's a whole, I think, movement in terms of what makes for in terms of production levels and production quality, what is the right kind of aesthetic for social content. And at Brave Bison, we talk quite a lot about kind of digital verite, almost as an evolution of kind of cinema verite and stuff, where actually something quite almost in the kind of the dogma film style, if you like, almost something that's a little bit more kind of loose and handheld, the kind of stuff that Paul Greengrass used to shoot for the Bourne movies, actually draws you in and is more intimate than something that's very, very kind of glossy and a bit more arm's length. And so, having a sort of almost a digital verite approach where it seems a bit more lo-fi doesn't mean it's any compromise on quality, because then the misperception is that quality means really expensive and a big crew and high production budgets, but that doesn't mean that high production budgets means high production value. No. So I think it's great that YouTube are doing it.
Yeah.
I think it's another way to go, because obviously the amount of different types of content you can get, when we sit down with our influencers, and then we sit down with our clients and talk about the amount of different content-based solutions that you can work with influencers on. It's not just a case of you make the influencer ambassador, or they do one piece of kind of 5-minute or 2.5-minute hero content and it's a shout out, or they do a little bit of a kind of a couple of mini pieces that then they push on their own social graph. It's a whole kind of module or approach where there's kind of like an ecosystem of different content solutions that you'd apply to potentially gaming brands, the gaming category versus say the film studio category, where again yes, red carpet pieces will be part of it, but it could even be, and this is getting even more interesting and sophisticated now, that where you almost take the yesteryear approach of product placement, and then you start to think about how that could evolve into influencer placement, influencers as extras, and then that's only again the tip of the iceberg, because you can suddenly start to think about ways of, during the shooting script even, of integrating influencers as doing something even within the scene of a particular film, so that then those separate bits that they're shooting, a film inside the film that's being shot, become extra bits of content that can go out there, that can predate the release of the film and become extra entry points into that whole world of that story, which is your classic transmedia storytelling idea. So it's it's a very exciting time in terms of influencer and content, no question.
Another story that's been in the news this week, for me, I found interesting, was the Apple TV potential link up with Twitter live streaming. Yep. So that got me thinking that a lot of the people that are used to watching these NFL games or whatever would have watched them on telly. Sure. So it's kind of interesting that it's gone through Twitter.
Watch the Super Bowl on TV.
Exactly. So you're going, obviously NFL goes to Twitter and then Twitter goes to telly. Isn't that kind of, do old habits die hard with viewing?
Is it counterintuitive, or I don't know? I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think what it really plays to is the sort of the themes around everything changes but stays the same, and technology accelerates change and disruption and progress and challenges the conventions of the way things are being done. And indeed, your recent article in San Francisco was talking all about how no businesses on the West Coast, because they're so close to the kind of the white heat of technology and progress, no company believes they should be resting on their laurels. It's the exact opposite. They want to be kind of anti-convention. and that's great. I think at the same time, what Twitter sensibly is recognising is that there are constants, and it's that balance of change within the frame, and the frame of constant, I think, is around the human condition, around human behaviours, insights into the way we are, and kind of they are perennial. We'll all, those elements and insights that are true to how we'll always be. We're social creatures. We're social by design. We crave belonging. We crave collective. We crave spending time together. We crave to both be part of things, and also then to take a step back and be individual, and stand, and be recognised in our own right. And if you just take that within the entertainment space or broadcasting, there's always going to be a version of that kind of water cooler moment and the day after a big event, those cultural moments, those sporting moments, the Super Bowls, the Olympics. They're always going to be absolute kind of galvanizing moments culturally, where people want to witness it in real time. It's the polar opposite of the idea of time shift or box set boshing and downloading, but those kind of moments that are you have that sense of anticipation before the fact, your 100-meter final, that kind of that real frenzy of possibility for what you're about to witness, that anticipation. I think that is something that won't change, and I think that's where broadcast media, or the broadcasting of that content is never going to change. It doesn't matter whether it's sport or whether it's even things like, Felix Baumgartner jumping from the edge of space. You're not going to time shift that. You're going to want to watch every second as it unfolds. Yeah. And so I think with Twitter, I mean, Twitter and originally, really when it was sort of making its pitch to brands and to agencies, almost came in and said, well, we can be a line item on your linear TV schedule, and if you look at your spot laydown of airtime scheduling, we can be an extra line item so that we can parallel track that advertising that if it sits within those commercial breaks, and we can almost make that schedule a social schedule. Yeah. And I think it's a sort of a recognition of that they sort of sit in tandem, really, and it's incrementally. Twitter's a fantastic way to create instant right of reply and to actually incrementally amplify the profile of the event, and by extension therefore reach audiences genuinely in a more engaged way, and I overuse the expression, but genuinely more engaged way, because they become this almost kind of barometer of pop culture in real time. That's a catch-all for the comments that are going on, that then feeds and then feeds the event that's exactly they're then witnessing. So.
Talking about content that kind of stays the same, looking to a big innovation that's coming is obviously VR, and this has been shown by New York Times. Purchasing Fake Love this week. Do you think that VR is this big way forward? Do you think it's as big as everyone's making out?
Well, VR is really exciting, no question. And I think, without question, it's not the technology itself, but it's what you do with it. Yeah. I think technology, however progressive, can fall over if it doesn't meet sort of the simplicity of use and the brilliance of experience. I mean, VR is almost getting a second time round, in the same way that 3D or home 3D is a second time round. No difference to the way that DVDs didn't first came out.
3D is like third or fourth time round, isn't it? Because they've been doing it in the 60s. They were doing
precisely. And there were laser discs before DVDs, before Blu-rays. I think it's a question of now. When is its moment appropriate? And I think it's all about the technology being able to be put into the hands of consumers at a low enough price point, and then that format will live or die based on the content that you can watch on that format. I don't think even content makers, storytellers, experienced designers have even had long enough to play with the hardware to start to think about it. But I think the early forays into it, there was some mini work that a VR agency in the US did that we did some work with, called Bipolar ID, did quite recently, a year or two ago now. And it was interesting to see how it worked and how it didn't work. They take quite a sort of cinematic approach to VR storytelling, and there's a question whether actually a cinematic approach is the right way to even approach VR, because cinematic by its nature suggests very glossy, again back to high-end production values, and quite at an arm's length, quite removed. And of course that big screen where you're sitting there in the dark captive isn't quite the same as that smaller screen, which is actually fully immersive around your peripheral vision. And everyone talks about VR being more immersive, but I think it's almost extending it that step beyond and going, well, what does that really mean, and what's the more interesting part of that? And if more immersive means, and from saying that backwater execution particularly, means almost more intimate, then you have a closeness and a sense of presence and in the moment that can be almost quite more emotionally disarming, I think. And so that particular...
My experience has been very emotionally disarming with VR, genuine terror in certain cases.
Well, exactly. And I think, so the execution I mentioned on the mini backwater execution, and it was almost a kind of Guy Ritchie style approach where it's a bit of a heist movie and there's lots of super slow-mo action moments. And those aren't, for me, as impressive as the moments where then there's a moment when you're back in the mini and the back seat and the two protagonists are in the front seat and they kind of pull up toward the end. And there's this strange sense of whether you should be there or not because you're truly in moment and in scene and almost voyeuristically. And it's like, that's kind of very compelling, really draws you in. That's engagement, but it's also slightly unnerving. And if a medium is capable of unnerving you in that way, then it holds all sorts of potential. And so the challenge to say storytellers is how to harness that.
I would say on that, though, I always think back to the first ever example of cinema when the audience were watching the train come out, the short film, and they all dive and scream because as far as they're concerned, that is a train coming at them. And obviously I think our brains might adapt and it might become, so now's a really key time I feel for it, because while people are still having that emotional engagement with it, our brains might just get a bit desensitized after a while, as they do.
Well, they will, and I think probably the solution isn't in trying to ramp it up each time to chase the higher narcotic fix, but in just almost, we don't want necessarily for people to be sort of diving to the floor in terror at what they're saying, particularly if they're actually wearing a headset, right? Because who knows where they're going to land. But I think what's fascinating is that with that example with the train, as the early days of cinema, is that people can only draw on existing points of reference to understand something new. And if the existing points of reference are real world, then they will dive for cover. And so it's how maybe it will be a good thing to increasingly normalise the experience of VR and for the technology to be more mainstream, and then to find a content solution that, again, I think it's all about placing that viewer absolutely in the heart of the narrative, potentially placing them almost in a kind of a role play moment themselves, so they feel a bit more participative and as a participant of that story. And then it's kind of like storytelling on rails. I talk about it, but so it plays into gaming a little bit, but you both want them to be emotionally close, but obviously they are not. It's not like a role play storytelling book based idea. So we'll see.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for chatting to us, and I hope you have a great week.
Thank you very much.